and tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll get started.
Yeah, hi, my name is Paul Mangini. I'm a retired Army. I was born in January 22nd, 1947. I joined the Army in 1966. Back in those days, you had two choices. You either went in the military or you went to college. College, there wasn't a college on every street corner like today. It was, you had to make college, and it was very difficult to get in. So your choices then were either to get drafted or to enlist. I had always wanted to be a pilot, so I had been reading in the back of I think it was a Look or a Life magazine, and there was an advertisement back there to be an Army pilot as a high school graduate. So one day I went down to the local recruiter and looked into the program and took some testing and was accepted into the program. Now this happened about February, and hadn't heard anything until about May or June, and then finally, I guess when your name comes up on the draft list, they finally decide to take you in. So I was taken in June of 1966. Did my basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana. Now, at the time, all Army pilots went through Fort Polk, Louisiana. That was the induction for Army pilots. You did your basic training there. And then after basic training, you went to Fort Walters, Texas, which is, maybe 300 or so miles away. Fort Walters was the basic or primary helicopter school in central Texas, maybe 100 miles to the west of Fort Worth. Did my primary training there, which lasted, I had 1 month of strict high-intensity OCS-type training, push-ups for everything, eating square meals, insofar that you literally had to eat square meals. And you did a month of that, and they weeded some people out that they thought that just wasn't going to make it through the program at that point. After that one month, or 4 weeks, they sent you to the flight line, and you started your flight training. And there was 4 months of flight training in 4 separate segments. The first segment being just solo flight. The second segment being advanced maneuvers, working in confined areas, slope landings, things like that. Third month was night flying, cross-country flying. And then the fourth month was a combination of everything. You graduated, and then you moved to Fort Rucker, Alabama. Now, the funny thing that they did was it just so happened to be that Mardi Gras weekend was the weekend that they let us drive from Fort Walters to Fort Rucker. So we detoured into New Orleans and partied for a couple of days. Drove like crazy to get there, partied for a couple of days, and then drove like crazy to get to Fort Rucker on time. Fort Rucker itself was broken again into 4 months. Basic instruments for the first month, advanced instruments for the second month. Huey transition the third month, and the fourth month was tactical training with the Huey. And after that, you were graduated as a warrant officer in the Army. And like everybody, and I don't think there are any exceptions, except for enlisted people who had already done a tour in Vietnam. Everybody just got orders for Vietnam. I arrived in Vietnam in July of '67, and was attached to, and I didn't realize this until much later on, many years later, how hard it was to get into this unit. This was a high-demand unit. Everybody wanted to get into it. Somehow I just fell into it. It was an all-gunship company. It was the first gunship company to be deployed to Vietnam. They actually had to develop the gunship and gunship tactics before they got to Vietnam. back in 1962. There is a book called Returning Fire, which documents the progression of the gunship and up until its departure from the unit's departure from Vietnam. The unit was called the 334th Armed Helicopter Company. It had been called the 197th Armed Helicopter Company, the 68th Armed Helicopter Company, and when it was first deployed to Vietnam, it was called the UTT, which stood for Utility Tactical Transport Company. Like I said, the first gunships were 30 caliber Browning machine guns left over from World War II in Korea, rocket pods that had been used on airplanes, fixed-wing airplanes and jets through Korea. They were bolted to the skids because the A model Hueys didn't have any hard mounts. And it was after the B model that they finally put hard mounts, and you could mount guns onto the actual frame of the aircraft. When I was there in July 67 to July of 68, we were flying Charlie model, the latest Charlie model gunships. In September, end of August, beginning of September of 67, we received the first Cobra gunships, and our unit was the first unit to get Cobra gunships. The whole unit was supposed to get all Cobras, but the Army had decided to give some Cobras to other units and to keep this unit as a mixed Charlie model Cobra unit. I stayed in the Charlie model gunships. It was a unique company in that we weren't attached to anybody. We weren't a first cav unit. We weren't attached to the 101st or the 82nd or anything like that. And we were kind of like a rent-a-gun company in that anybody who wanted us could put the mission request in, and we would fly their gun cover missions for them. It was unique because one month you'd be working for Special Forces, the next month you'd be working for the Navy SEALs, and a couple of days you'd be working for the Australian LRPs, back to Special Forces, back to the SEALs, and we kept moving around working for different units during this time. The first mission, actually long-term mission I went on, was for Special Forces unit up in the Parrot Speak area up by Nui Ba Din. We worked Special Forces. We had to get initiated into Special Forces. We had to do McGuire rigs. We had to do rappelling and stuff like that for no other reason, just as an initiation. We were given a red, white, and blue bandana, which indicated that we were Special Forces aviation, not Special Forces trained, but we had been trained by the Special Forces as an aviation unit. We worked for them for about 6 weeks up in the Cambodian border area by Nui Ba Din, that area up in there. We worked with the unit did have a lift platoon, which worked with hatchet teams and did missions like that. They had just come back from a mission in Laos, where they were doing crop dusting up in Laos. The 4th platoon, which was the gangbuster platoon, was the lift platoon. They were eventually disbanded around January, February of 68. But the other 3 platoons of gunships, which were the 1st platoon Playboys, the 2nd platoon Raiders, and the 3rd platoon Dragons, they stayed together right till they left Vietnam. The primary, one of the primary missions that we did was something called the Firefly. The unit had developed the Firefly long before I had gotten there. And basically what it was three helicopters, a light gunship team and a D model or H model Huey with a 50 caliber machine gun mounted in the door. The high ship, which was the DH model, they did navigation and they did all the communications work and pretty much ran the other two aircraft. The light ship was a Charlie model gunship, fully set up, but it had 7 landing lights in a cluster in the right-hand door. And it would fly at about 500 feet, and with the light, the crew chief holding on to the light, but he'd be running the light along the sides of canals and rivers and up and down roads looking for vehicles, or obviously in the rivers, sampans, which we found quite often. The third aircraft flew just outside the glow of the light of the light ship. It was a fully armed gunship, blacked out, and if anybody engaged the light ship or the high ship, he was in a perfect position to just lower his nose and shoot his rockets, or the door gunners would shoot their machine guns. I did quite a bit of this. I flew the light ship at the 500 feet with the spotlight on it for about 600 hours of my 900 hours of time over there. We did, I was only shot up really bad once. The aircraft got shot up so bad that we had to land it. It wasn't a crash or anything. We were not too far from Saigon. I made it to Hotel 3 in Saigon. And we took about 33 bullet holes in the aircraft. Nobody was hurt. One bullet came up through the floor, up my shin and out the top of the aircraft. But other than that, nobody was really hurt in the aircraft. There was a time when we found a sampan full of rockets, and we shot at the rockets. We shot at the sampan. The rockets ignited and started to pinwheel out of the sampan. Well, one pinwheeled right at us, and just at the last minute before it struck the aircraft, it just took another direction and spun off in another direction. But living conditions there, I had no problem. I lived in a French villa almost the whole time I was there. Had tennis court next door. We did not have a swimming pool, no. But it was air conditioned. We had a full bar. We ran a restaurant in our officers club. The 118th Assault Helicopter Company was next door to us. They ran the mess hall. So we were running a mess hall restaurant out. And people would come, guys would come from all over the area to go to our restaurant. And we would run a movie theater and everything else. So living conditions was really not too horrific. After I left Vietnam in July of '68, I came home on leave and found that one of my closest friends, Jim Mitchell, I had gone through basic training with, flight school with. He extended in the unit, and he had crashed about a week after I returned and was killed. He was the only one in the aircraft killed. After Vietnam, I went to Germany for 2 years. Flew, again, another unique unit. We flew the border, the southern end of the border from the Austrian up to the East German border, mostly Czechoslovakia, and the southern part of East Germany. We stayed there for 2 years and had an enjoyable time. It was a good place to be after Vietnam. The beer and women and everything else that went along with it was just an enjoyable 2 years. I left the Army on my birthday in January 22nd, 1970. Came home and immediately joined the New York National Guard. Flew out on Long Island, flew old Korean War vintage H-13s. And slowly they got Hueys and more modern aircraft. But at the time, I was flying an H-13, built in 1952. Went to college, got a degree in engineering, married, got a job at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft up in East Hartford, Connecticut. Decided at some point in there I absolutely hated engineering, could not stand sitting at a desk cranking numbers, and in those days we were still using slide rules, so there were almost no calculators at all. Worked there for about 4 years, gave it up, and became a police officer in Middletown, Connecticut. Did 24 years as a police officer, transferred to the Connecticut National Guard, and I flew with the National Guard until I was 60 years old, and had about 41 years of service. Worked for the police department for 24 years, I believe, and left there, and I went to Hartford Hospital as a helicopter pilot for the hospital. I flew Lifestar, which was the name of the program, for 11 years, still in the National Guard. And also in the meantime, the municipal police in Connecticut were running a UH-1 Huey police markings. And I was volunteering my time with flying a Huey, and I still am today. Retired from the Army in the National Guard again on my birthday in 2007 with almost 41 years of service. Joined the Civil Air Patrol, which is the Air Force Auxiliary, and I have been flying with the Air Force Auxiliary since 2007. I think that's about it.
Let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
In Vietnam, how did you deal with the stress?
I think I was too young and stupid. You know the old saying is, you're I can't remember the old saying, but you're just too dumb to know really. You're immortal. I guess that's what I'm looking for. You have this feeling of immortality. I did receive shrapnel wounds over there, and I can remember getting hit in the head and in the leg, and having this flash of, oh God, what's my mother going to think, and things like that, and because her brother was a pilot in World War II, and he had been killed, so. I felt bad about that. I can remember once, especially working with Special Forces, having an anxiety attack. But not only were my living conditions good, Benoit was an open city. We could go downtown. We had our own Jeeps. Each platoon had a Jeep, so we could drive down to Saigon. We had regular trips. I think every Wednesday the maintenance aircraft would go down to Vung Tau, which was the pearl of the Orient, the old French pearl of the Orient. It was just a seaside town on the South China Sea. I think between being able to go off base and relaxing, doing whatever. Don't want to get into specifics here, but I think that had a lot to do with it. It was really almost I wouldn't say an 8-hour-a-day job because it was longer than 8 hours, but it was a 12-hour-a-day job. I came back to my air-conditioned room. I had a complete stereo system. That's still the amp up there that I had in Vietnam, and the speakers are up in the attic, and it's Sansui, and I into music and going downtown and relaxing, and it didn't seem to be a big. I don't remember it being a big problem stress-wise. It's something I could deal with. I went to Japan, and my sole purpose for going to Japan was I wanted to make a snowball. I'm from New England. I grew up in New York. I moved to Connecticut. I wanted to make a snowball. I got off the plane in Tokyo, and there was some snow on the ground. I picked up the snow, made a snowball, throw it at a tree. I think I missed the tree, and I said, well, okay, that's good. And then I went and spent my week in R&R in Japan. Met some pilots at the hospital who were recruiting. One of them was from a neighboring unit, and I just hung around with him. And he'd been there for a couple of months, and he showed me all the ropes of Japan and had me driving. We were going all over Tokyo and having a good time for the week I was there.
Just the one R&R?
Just the one, yeah.
Do you stay in touch with any of your folks in your unit?
Oh, yeah. Well, between the VHP...
We have about 10 minutes. We have about 10 minutes.
Okay. Between the VHPA and, which is the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, they have annual meetings, gatherings. And I've gone to several of those, and I've run into quite a few people that I knew in Vietnam. But the big one was about a year and a half ago. We had a reunion down at Fort Rucker, Alabama, with the unit to include the crew chiefs and gunners and everything else. And we met, we got together, and quite surprisingly, almost my whole unit from that time frame was there, who were left alive. Several have passed away over the years. I think there was only like one person missing from my flight platoon. As far as the pilots, with the crew chiefs, there were several crew chiefs there also. And we really had a great time. Filled in a lot of missing blanks, found out what we were all doing, and hadn't seen my roommate from Vietnam since I'd left. And it was kind of amusing in that I was in the room, and I'm standing there, and this guy walks in, and I don't recognize the guy, and everybody's talking to him, and from my platoon, and I don't recognize this guy. A big guy, bald, and I go, who's that guy? He goes, oh, that's Jim Pritt. And I go, holy crap, so I go over and, hey, Jim, how you doing? I give him the old bear hug and stuff like that. And he's over my back going, who the hell is this? So I hear somebody say, that's Paul Mangini. So his wife starts laughing, and she's going, so what's up? And she says, it's all he's talked about for the last year is running into you. And he didn't know who you were, and I said, I didn't know who he was either, So, but it was a great reunion. And now some of us keep in touch fairly regularly. 4 or 5 of us, you send emails back and forth and jokes and stuff like that. And we send that stuff back and forth. And I think they're talking about another reunion again coming up in the next year or two. Just the grumblings of it. But we keep saying, okay, we're all going to get together. And it just doesn't seem to happen. But we do keep in touch with one another. One of the funny stories is I mentioned about the pinwheeling rockets coming up out of the sampan, and I was telling this story at a National Guard event quite a few years ago. And one of the crew chiefs says to me, "Hey, Bobby Nowak, he told me the same story." So I go over and I go to Bobby. I said, "What unit were you in Vietnam?" He goes, "Oh, the 334th Armed Helicopter Company." And I go, "What platoon were you in?" He goes, "The 2nd Platoon Raiders." I go, "You and me were in the same platoon?" And what it was is he had gotten there. I was getting ready to go home. I was probably had 2 months before I was going home. I think it was around May. And he had just gotten there. And it was one of his first missions. And it was near the end of my tour. I never really, after a while, you just start blocking people out and stuff like that. So I never really knew him over there. But we flew together in the Guard. We had both been on that mission, and he remembered it. And then he gave me a lot of stuff that he gave me yearbooks, and the unit had printed up yearbooks and everything else, and he'd given me yearbooks and that he had brought home from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your military service, did it have, or how did it have, obviously, did influence over the rest of your life when you were flying to the Guard, flying to the hospital, flying different...
Well, it obviously gave me a fantastic occupation. You know, I mean, if it wasn't for Vietnam, it would have been, golden, He took a high school kid, who was very smart. I got very high SAT scores, and I in New York, I had New York State Regent Scholarship, which was, they would pay my tuition to any college I could get into. I couldn't find a college that would touch my grades. So the brains was there, the laziness was there also, I guess. So they took a kid out of high school, sent him to flight school. Sent me to Vietnam. And then I continued flying till today. I'm still flying because of my flight training back then.
Mm-hmm. How about military versus police force in terms of?
I don't really see there's the military part of the chain of command and stuff like that works. But I don't see a connection. The military at the time, and it was not. The two jobs really weren't compatible. I mean, they weren't. The one thing nice about being in the military is I had a good understanding of chain of command and things like that, and not fighting uphill battles and fighting the people above me. But other than that, the two jobs are really not that related.
Do you have any specialty as a policeman?
I was a training officer for about 5 years. I was firearms instructor for almost the whole time I was there. For some reason or another, once they found out that I was in the military, well, maybe this connects, they said, "Oh, okay, we're going to send you to armorer school," And so I went almost right away. I was only there maybe 3 months, and they sent me away to school to learn how to fix and repair guns. So I was a department armorer. I was a firearms instructor. I was on a SWAT team. I was the head of when I left, I was the head of the sniper team. There was only 4 of us, but there was a four-man team of snipers. Basically 2 snipers, 2 spotters, but again, I still fly on a volunteer basis, a police helicopter. That's the connection with the police department. Now, Lifestar, again, it was funny because, you always kid the fire department about how they would be sleeping on the midnight shift and stuff like that. We were out working, and it was always this back and forth between us and the fire department, good-natured stuff. But then when I went to Lifestar, and I was sleeping through the night, and I was working 12-hour shifts, was sleeping through the night, and having doing that thing, and then the public relations with Lifestar is, everybody loves the Lifestar pilot like everybody loves the fire department, so. You weren't stopping people and giving tickets and things like that, or arresting their brothers and nephews or whatever. So it was a totally different environment being at Lifestar.
Mm-hmm. Similar stresses, as say the police forces and military force.
Stress-wise,
versus.
The thing with the military, especially Vietnam, and with the police, is it's kind of dull and boring, and then all of a sudden it gets crazy, and it's that going from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds versus, you know, the nice, lazy, you know, do it when you want to do it, you know, type of thing. And that would be a connection between the military and the police.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think we've just about beat it up pretty good here.
Well, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be interviewed today.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. I know who this is at the front door, so.